VTP. VTP stands for VLAN Trunking Protocol. It's used to automatically update VLAN configurations on switches rather than manually configuring each one. There are three different kinds of VTP modes: VTP Mode Server, VTP Mode Client, and VTP Mode Transparent. Let's talk about Server. The VTP Mode Server is like the brain of the VTP modes. It can create, modify, and delete VLANs from the network. It also transmits all of these configurations to other switches on the network that are in the same domain. So if a VLAN is created in the Cisco domain, all switches in the Cisco domain that are set up as a server or a client VTP mode will receive an update telling them that a new VLAN has been created, and they will add it to their VLAN configuration. Every time an update is made, the revision number changes. The revision number is incremented by 1 every time a change is made. A switch can look at this and compare its own revision number to see if it needs an update. Client mode. Unlike server, client cannot create, modify, or delete VLANs from the network. Client does not require as much memory space as a switch configured with server because they do not store the VLAN configurations in the NVRAM. In fact, if a client switch is shut down, the configurations are lost until you turn it back on and it receives the configurations from the server switch. Client mode is good to use on a large network. Using client switches helps to add reliability because admins logging on to a client switch will not be able to change the VLAN config and would cut down on the possibility of multiple redundant changes being made at the same time because they would have to log onto a server switch to change the configurations. Transparent mode. Transparent mode is not like either server or client. Transparent mode does not broadcast its VLAN changes and does not sync its VLAN configuration with the server switch. Transparent mode is used for local VLANs that other switches do not have access to or do not need access to. Even though it does not sync its VLAN configuration, it does forward the updates received to other switches. The VLAN configurations are saved in NVRAM on the switch, so instead of losing all the configurations on the switch when it is powered off, it retains them and reloads the configurations when it is powered back on.
Okay, so we've talked about our three VTP modes. One thing to keep in mind is that all the switches need to be in the same domain and all have the same password, and they are case sensitive. So if you were configuring them with a Cisco domain, if you used capital C on the server and lowercase c on the clients, they would not be able to communicate. The command to set up VTP mode is VTP mode and the mode. So let's talk through a short example. I have 3 switches, all in the same network, and I want to add them all to the Cisco domain and all with a password of lab. I want switch 1 to be the server, and I want switch 2 and 3 to both be client. So let's start with switch 1. Enter global configuration mode, then type VTP mode server. This ensures that the switch is indeed set to the server mode. Next we type VTP domain Cisco. This changes the default domain from null to Cisco. And lastly, we type VTP password lab. This sets the password for the domain to lab. The commands for switch 2 and switch 3 will both be the same because we're changing them to the same VTP mode, the same domain, and configuring them with the same password. So I'll only run through them once. So, on either switch, you enter global configuration mode, type VTP mode client. This changes the default mode from server to client. Next, we type VTP domain Cisco. Again, this changes the default from null to Cisco. And lastly, we type VTP password lab. Now all the switches should be configured properly, and the server will begin transferring its packets to the client switches and updating their VLAN configurations. Okay, so you just configured your 3 switches with VTP, and you want to make sure that it's working properly. On switch 1, after you've created the VLANs you've needed, go to switch 2 or 3. After the switch boots up, type enable, and then type the command show VLAN brief. The list of the VLANs configured on the switch will pop up. If the ones that you have created are not on there, then something's not right. If everything is working properly, you should see the VLANs that you created on switch 1 in the listing. Some of the common problems encountered with VTP configuration are a misspelling in the domain name, a misspelling in the password, or a possible version mismatch. Make sure that on all the switches, the domain name is set to the same word and all the passwords are set exactly alike. If there is no problem with the domain name or the passwords of the domains, it could be a possible version mismatch. To check this out, after the switch boots up, type enable and then type the command show VTP status. After you type the command, the switch will display the VTP status. The first line will tell you what version of VTP the switch is running, whether it be VTP 1 or VTP 2. Do this on all the switches and make sure that they are all running the same version. So there's your VTP modes, a short configuration and a small troubleshooting. Things to keep in mind is that server mode allows you to modify, create, and delete VLANs from the network. Client mode, however, does not, but it doesn't take up as much space because it doesn't store the configurations in NVRAM like server does. Transparent does not sync its VLAN databases with the server and instead remains transparent to the other switches. However, it does store its configuration in NVRAM and will not be lost when it's powered off. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you're configuring all your switches, you need to make sure they're in the same domain, have the same password, in the same case. Otherwise, the switches will not be able to communicate. This is Jay Walters. Thanks for watching my video.